Today's story shocked not only the entire peaceful town of Eislingen, but also all of Germany. It could have happened anywhere. A loving family, parents and two older sisters were murdered by a brother and his friend, with whom they all lived on good terms. Why did this happen? I invite you to listen to this terrible crime. Eislingen is a small city in Germany. It has a population of about 20,000 and is one of those towns where it is said that everyone knows each other. Residents of such cities feel safe, both on the street and in their homes, mostly knowing each other well and taking an interest in their neighbors' lives. Eislingen is also an exceptionally clean and well-kept city. In front of nice houses, whether single or multifamily, one can see neat lawns, gardens and evenly trimmed shrubs. In 2009 the apartment of Mr. and Mrs. Häussler was located in a multifamily building surrounded by greenery. The couple had 3 children, now grown up. 2 daughters and a son. Anne-Kristen, 24, and Anne-Marie, 22, were studying at university, while their 18-year-old son Andreas was studying at a high school for economics. Mr. and Mrs. Häussler were a respected family throughout the city, with Father Hans-Jürgen having been heavily involved in local public life for years, both politically and in the church, and Mother Else a teacher. As for their children, everyone unanimously spoke of them, well-mannered, capable, and kind. The children, too, have been involved for years, appropriate to their age, in various public activities and belong to various associations. The entire Häussler family spent Easter together. Everyone was very much looking forward to this holiday time together. They planned a long hike for Good Friday, in which several friends and acquaintances were also to participate. It was Thursday, April 9th. In the evening the Häussler couple went to a restaurant. Else and Hans-Jürgen sat there with friends over wine. It was very cheerful, the atmosphere was joyful, everyone loudly sang old songs. Around 10:30 p.m., son Andreas showed up at the restaurant with his friend, 19-year-old Frederic. Andreas, with his typical outgoingness, embraced his mother and father in greeting. Frederic shook everyone's hand. The boys have been friends for years, are almost inseparable, and Frederic has sometimes even been invited on trips with the entire Häussler family. The boys ordered something to drink. Everyone talked loudly, laughed, and the conversation descended to the topic of the excursion eventually planned by Mr. and Mrs. Häussler and their friends for the next day. Andreas and Frederic announced that they are also eager to participate. The boys say goodbye after half an hour. They were going to Frederic's, as his parents had invited Andreas to spend the night. First thing in the morning, Anne-Kristen's boyfriend came by Mr. and Mrs. Häussler's house, as he and his girlfriend were scheduled to sing together in the church choir that day. However, no one responded to the doorbell, nor did anyone answer the phone. So the young man concludes that the whole family went to church much earlier for some reason, so he decides to simply join them there. Meanwhile, at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Begenat, that is, at Frederic's parents' house, everyone is eating breakfast, talking and laughing as usual. Andreas made a surprise for everyone. First thing in the morning he went to the gas station to get fresh buns. After breakfast, the 2 boys drove the car to Andreas' house, intending to go to church with his parents and sisters. Around 10:30 in the morning at Frederic's parents' house, the phone rings. The phone is picked up by Frederic's 12-year-old brother. He hears the voice of a man unknown to him, who says something to the boy that he is unable to understand. The child then hangs up, but the phone rings again. This time it is answered by Susie, Frederic's mother. A strange man in an irritated voice says, "Please come immediately, something terrible has happened at Mr. and Mrs. Häussler's." Susie Begenat immediately got into the car and drove to Friedhofstrasse, to Andreas' house. Only there on the spot will she learn that the one who called is a paramedic. An ambulance and police cars stand on Friedhofstrasse. Andreas is standing in front of the house, and even from a distance he can be heard crying loudly and desperately. At one point he exclaims, "I'll kill him when I get him." Frederic sits on the ground and shakes. The horrified Mrs. Begenat learns that Andreas' sisters and parents are dead, and that the boys have discovered their bodies in the house. Since they are important witnesses and must be questioned, Frederic's mother agrees with the police that she herself will take both boys to a nearby county town to the police station. Information about the crime against the Häussler family circulates through the town like lightning. Residents bring flowers to the house and light candles. At this point, Andreas seems to need the most support. Some attach short messages to the flowers, such as, "Andreas, we're with you." And many of Mr. and Mrs. Häussler's friends and acquaintances phone, or even drive to the police station where Andreas is being held. These people express a desire to take the boy to their home as soon as the interrogation is over. At the police station, in the corridor, Frederic's mother sits. Her chair stands directly under the door of the room where she knows her son is being interrogated. The woman waits patiently, but an hour passes, then another, then another. Mrs. Begenat hasn't had the experience of witness interrogation in her life, but she begins to get the impression that something isn't quite right, and she feels the indefinable fear, increasing with each passing hour, adding to the terrible stress in which she has been stuck since the morning. Those hours are 5 in all. Finally, a policeman comes out into the corridor and addresses her. Frederic knows something, but doesn't say what. Shortly thereafter, Mrs. Begenat learns from another policeman that traces of gunpowder were found on the hands of both boys. It then occurs to Frederic's mother that there is no reason to sit at the police station any longer. Later that day, news begins to spread around the city that the 18-year-old son of the murdered Häussler couple and his friend have been detained, as they may have something to do with the crime. Those who know Andreas and Frederic absolutely cannot believe it. In general, other residents of Eislingen also doubt that the two detained boys are the actual murderers, so people are starting to get scared. Some are so afraid that they do not leave their homes for days after the crime. It is only when the police officially publish a reconstruction of the course of the crime a few days after Easter that the truth, it seems, slowly begins to reach the residents of Eislingen. It's hard to describe the extent of their shock. This is especially true for those who knew Andreas and Frederic, their neighbors, their schoolmates, their families, their teachers and the guardians of the various organizations to which both the suspects and their parents belong. The disbelief and shock are so great that many of these people decide to seek the help of professionals who specialize in crisis intervention. But above all, one another keeps asking the same questions. Why did Andreas murder his loved ones? Why did Frederic take part in it? How is it possible that such ordinary boys were able to do such a thing? Why did no one notice beforehand that the boys had some problems? People are exchanging information about Andreas's family, trying to form a coherent picture and find answers. The case is very media-savvy, so more detailed information about the relationships in the family permeates into the public domain quite quickly. People familiar with the Häussler family unanimously repeat that it can be considered exemplary, and Andreas himself was handsome, witty, gallant. A friend of Andreas' sisters says that the sisters loved their brother and were proud of him. His father also always spoke of pride in his son. The children were very important to him. He wanted them to choose the right path in life, because materially their future was secured. On the other hand, however, many people expressed the opinion that Andreas' father was quite strict, that he made sure that everyone in the house followed certain rules, such as, for example, eating dinner together, having all family members live a healthy lifestyle, eating healthy, and spending their free time together. Children, when they were younger, were not allowed to eat sweets, watch TV, play computer games. Those closest to them, including the murdered man's half-brother, emphasized that Else and Hans-Jürgen were a good couple and that there was a strict but loving atmosphere in their home. They all rule out that there was something going on in the family that would justify the hatred that might have pushed Andreas to commit the crime. This crime is something completely incomprehensible to those who know Frederic as well, since he is generally considered to be a quiet, shy boy who always keeps to himself. No one has ever heard him cause any trouble. Weeks and then months pass, and everyone waits for the trial to begin. For those who knew the boys, the trauma still lingers. Those among them who are parents ask themselves, if Andreas and Frederic were able to commit such a crime, how do I know if my child is not also capable of it? The trial begins on October 12th, almost exactly 6 months after the crime. The hearing takes place before the juvenile chamber of the Land Court. It is being held in public, since, due to the enormous public interest, the court has decided that a group of named journalists, this is 9 people chosen at random, can observe it, with the proviso that, if necessary, it can be decided to keep selected hearings secret. Everyone is hoping that everything related to this case, which still has more questions than answers, will now be clarified. Even at the very beginning, more doubts are being raised. On the 3rd day of the trial, Frederic testifies that he was the only one who shot members of the Häussler family, and that he did it out of love for Andreas. This clearly contradicts what he said during the first interrogation after the crime, when he testified that Andreas shot his sisters and his father, but was unable to shoot his mother, so he asked Frederic to do it, and Frederic in turn helped him do it. Although the attorney for Hans-Jürgen's half-sister, the auxiliary prosecutor, believes that the first version should definitely be believed, but this is one detail that will forever remain unclear. In any case, the explanations given during the trial at least allow for a fairly accurate reconstruction of the crime. On the evening of Maundy Thursday, April 9th, the 2 boys have dinner at Frederic's house, and after eating it they go to Andreas' apartment. In the basement they change into the clothes they had prepared earlier. Andreas and Frederic go up the stairs to the sisters' room. It is about 10 p.m. Andreas' sisters are sitting on the bed in their pajamas and watching TV. "What is this?" asks Anne Kristen, annoyed by this sudden intrusion. There is no answer. 10 gunshots are fired in her direction, 9 in Anne-Marie's direction. The boys carefully pick up shell casings from the floor. In the basement, they change their clothes, hide the pistols along with silencers and the clothes they were wearing a moment ago. They leave the house, heading to the restaurant where they know Andreas' parents are staying. They get there around 10:30 p.m. They spend there, as they are already known, about half an hour. After that time, they return to Andreas' house. In the basement, they change again into what they were wearing when they committed the crime on the sisters, and sit down in the living room, in anticipation of Andreas' parents. The parents return after midnight. The father is in the hallway when 8 bullets reach him. The mother is hit by 3 as she stands in the bathroom doorway. The perpetrators collect shell casings and redress. They pack the shells, clothes and weapons into plastic bags. They bury the bags in the woods outside the city, in a previously prepared hole. What they don't know is that while they are at Andreas' house, they have a witness who is partly watching their actions. The neighbor, who lives in the house across the street, is awake because she has a sick child. Trying to soothe it, the woman walks around the apartment, rocking the toddler in her arms. From her windows you can practically see inside the rooms in Andreas' parents' apartment. Around 10 p.m., in the illuminated windows of Mr. and Mrs. Häussler, the neighbor sees the silhouettes of 2 men. The silhouettes are constantly moving around various rooms. The woman doesn't recognize anyone in them, but she also doesn't think about it any further. Before 2 a.m., the neighbor again stands at the window. Now she also notices 2 male silhouettes in the apartment. The men have naked torsos and are stretching their hands upwards, as if in some triumphant gesture. Now the woman immediately recognizes them. They are Andreas and Frederic. Everything seems very strange to her. After hiding the traces of the crime in the forest, the 2 murderers go to Frederic's house. There they go to bed, and when they get up in the morning, they act as if nothing had happened. Andreas goes to the store and brings fresh buns for everyone. Together with a friend and his family, they eat breakfast. After breakfast, the 2 boys go to Andreas' place. They enter the apartment. In the hallway they jump over their father's body, then go to the sister's room. Andreas searches the floor next to both bodies for the remaining shells, as only now, in daylight, is he able to find them all. Only then do they both go outside, pretending to have just found the bodies of Andreas' parents and sisters. Of course, during the trial, the defendants were asked many times why they did it. Unfortunately, none of the statements, whether by the defendants or their defense attorneys, can be considered satisfactory. Andreas' attorney tries to emphasize the fact that his client lacked support and respect from his family, that he was the only one in his family who opposed his domineering father. Andreas supposedly felt so badly about his family that he had been thinking about moving out for a long time. but eventually rejected the thought because he realized that it would be very bad for him financially. Andreas himself also stresses that he did not have a good relationship with his father, that he felt led by the hand and dominated, that he had suicidal thoughts due to the situation at home. At the same time, the defendant claims that he liked his sisters and loved his mother very much, but their solidarity with his father made him decide in the end. It was either them or me. The final decision to commit the crime was made in February 2009, during a trip in Allgäu. Conditions were very difficult, and due to the fact that the father had mistaken the path, the whole family wandered 2 hours longer in the dark, wading in snow up to their knees. The son told his father that he had taken the wrong route, but his opinion was ignored. It was then, during that trip, that Andreas felt, in his own words, straight unconscious rage, which resulted in his irrevocable decision to murder his entire family. Andreas' explanation does not seem fully convincing. The psychiatrist expert, for example, states that after hours of conversations with the accused, it remains completely unclear to him why his mother and sisters had to be killed, since almost everything that was a problem in family relations referred exclusively to his father. The prosecution, on the other hand, suggests a completely different motive. When Andreas turned 18 2 months before the crime, he obtained a power of attorney for a Swiss account containing more than 250,000 euros. It was then, according to the prosecution, that it occurred to Andreas to murder his sisters and parents so that he could dispose of the money himself. It also remains unclear to the expert psychiatrist why, on the night the sisters were dead, the two boys went to the restaurant to see Andreas' parents. The psychiatrist tries to explain this behavior in various ways, including tactical considerations, an attempt to demonstrate strength, and even a desire for a kind of farewell to their loved ones, but none of the versions is convincing in his opinion. As for Frederic, according to what he told the expert, he took part in the crime for 2 reasons. He didn't want to lose his friend, and he also sympathized with him, and could understand his hatred for his family. Frederic's lawyer points out that to understand what happened, it is also important to know the boys' accounts. They both knew each other from their early school years. Frederic admired Andreas, who was always cheerful, confident, liked by everyone and desired in any company. In this respect, Frederic was almost his opposite. He kept to himself, was rather disliked, and often even not accepted by the group. He never dreamed of being able to get any closer to Andreas. However, when he unexpectedly chose him as a friend 2 or 3 years ago, Frederic felt as if some of Andreas's splendor flowed to him as well. Even at the beginning of the trial, there were rumors that the boys had a homosexual relationship, but it is difficult to confirm this in any way. Andreas denies this, and Frederic's parents claim that it was simply, at least on their son's part, an extremely deep feeling of friendship. Frederic's lawyer emphasizes that the boys certainly completed each other. In some way, this relationship allowed Frederic to increase his self-esteem, and Andreas simply needed someone he could command. By using this argument, Frederic's defense attorney is clearly trying to present his client as someone who is, in some sense, morbidly addicted to Andreas. It seems that this assumption is at least partially confirmed when, during the trial, details of Andreas and Frederic's previous actions come to light. Thanks to the media, the public learns about the existence of things that no one, even those closest to them, had any idea about before. It started a year or 2 earlier with tormenting animals. Andreas once placed a live hedgehog on a hot grill. He asked Frederic to do the same with his pet cat. Frederic did not want to agree to this, explaining that the atmosphere in the house after the death of his beloved cat would be terrible. So the boys agreed that they would choose the neighbor's cat. The animal often came to the Häussler's apartment to visit, and was liked by all the household members. Andreas and Frederic caught the cat and put it in a bag. They hit the animal in the bag with knives until it stopped showing signs of life. The friends also made a movie around that time. It shows them catching a goose in a meadow, killing it, and then lifting up the bird's blood-dripping body. At the same time, each of them holds a bloody stick high above their heads, as if in some sort of triumphant gesture. From the classified part of their testimonies, it is known that at such moments their emotions appeared, but they did everything to calm them down. The accusation emphasizes that Andreas and Frederic have created a parallel world with their own system of values. In this world, everything was allowed to them, so they gave vent to their fantasies about killing. Each of them lived in a kind of split, transitioning smoothly from their normal lives to this parallel world to which only they two had access as the chosen ones. 7 months before the crime, they broke into the headquarters of the shooting brotherhood, to which they belonged. They were very average shooters, but they did not hide their fascination with weapons. One evening they blocked the door of the shooting house so that they could enter it at night. They cut open the safe with an electric saw and took 19 weapons and 1,700 rounds of ammunition. They hid the loot at Frederic's grandmother's in the attic, under the floorboards. When the theft was discovered the next day, Andreas was one of those who expressed his outrage the loudest. The friends did not hide several of their pistols, wanting to have easy access to them. Sometimes they carried them with them in backpacks. They even took them to school, walking with them around the schoolyard and shouting slogans at each other that were incomprehensible to outside observers. The theft of the weapon should be interpreted as meaning that the boys planned the crime much earlier and very carefully. They both admit that they considered various murder scenarios, shooting the remaining family members while hiking, gassing and then dissolving the bodies in acid, death and fire. They had also committed several other minor crimes that no one had known about before, but which the prosecutor had now carefully enumerated: driving without a license, breaking into a school at night, and breaking into a supermarket. The police came after them twice in total, but failed to catch them. Finally, in 2010, the court sentenced Andreas to life imprisonment because it found that the boy acted out of greed, i.e. extremely low motives. Frederic, a year older, is sentenced to 10 years in prison. The court finds Andreas unworthy of inheritance. The family's assets are approximately 800,000 euros, as the amount on the Swiss account also includes plots and real estate. The court decides that the property will be divided between the parents' siblings. Since April 2019, Frederic has been free again. He does not appear in the media and nothing is currently known about him. And that's the end of the story. If you like my channel and want to hear more, please subscribe. Stay safe.